What's good, guys? Welcome back to another crime episode. So today we are going to be discussing the case of Rodney Reed and Stacy Sties. Pronouncing that, I think, so wrong. I have to learn this, y'all. I have to learn these names. Goodness. But I have never heard of this case, guys. I'm gonna be real with you. Of course, I wouldn't have known about it. This case happened when I was 6 years old, but it is still ongoing, making national news because Mr. Rodney Reed is set to be executed on November 20th of this year. So why are we talking about his case? Because his case is really crazy and funky, and it really got my antennas going off, and there's so much information in this case that is just mind-boggling. Now, my good girlfriend, she tagged me in this case, and I was like, you know what is this? What is it talking about? I started to read, and I seen that the Innocence Project was currently helping him to be free, and then I just started to like really look at the case and figure out what was going on, right? So as I'm researching, I'm finding out that this case is just freaking crazy. So this case happened in April 23rd of 1996. Mind you, I wasn't even 6 yet. I was going on 6, so I was like 5. And he has been on death row for about 20 some years. Crazy, oh my goodness. So when I seen that the Innocence Project was taking on his case, I had to dig deeper. So, but this case is sad because someone lost their life, Miss Stacy Sties. Yeah, so let's get into this case. Let's talk about it. Maybe you guys heard about this case. I know maybe I have a lot of people who are older than me. So if you were born way before me, I would love to hear what your thoughts were when this case happened in Texas, you know, just out of curiosity, because he's been on death row for like 20 some years, and that's major. He has literally failed to get lethal injections because of everything that has been going on in his case. And I think this is his last stop. I think he had 3 chances from what I've read. Crazy, y'all. Like, this case is so crazy because the details that are involved in it, and it's just like, you don't know who actually killed Miss Stacy. From what I think, I don't know. We'll go on, and maybe you guys can let me know what you think about this case. So on April 23rd of 1996, Miss Stacy was on her way to work, and she worked at Heaps, a grocery store, and she had to be to work around 4 a.m. and she left her house around 3 o'clock that morning, but she never made it to work. Her boss ended up calling her fiance and saying that she never came to work. Mind you, this is 1996, y'all. So can you imagine, like, 4 o'clock, your employee not coming to work? You're probably really thinking the worst, which in fact ended up being the situation for Miss Stacy. So in that time frame, Stacy was missing, along with a red truck that she was driving of her fiance's. And her fiance was a cop at the time, and they were about, I believe Miss Stacy was 19 years old. They never really stated how old her fiance was, but I believe they were around the same age, and he was a cop, and she worked at a grocery store. And on that night, he told law enforcement that Stacy left. He was sleeping. They did their normal routine. They took a bath, laid down for a little bit, and then that's when Stacy left, and he was asleep when she left out the door. But she took his vehicle to work because she worked really early in the morning. Nearly after about 3 p.m. that same day, that's when they end up finding Miss Stacy, and her body was thrown in a ditch, but her vehicle was parked at a school nowhere near where her body was. She was strangled, and medical examiners stated that she was also sexually assaulted. And as I was researching as well, it looked as if like she was burnt from on her neck and like around her legs from like a lot of private investigators when they were looking at a lot of the evidence. And guys, this case is, and I say really funky because there was a lot of things left out. There was a lot of things that weren't done. And it's partially because if you have never known who Rodney Reed is, of course you've seen this photo because I posted it. He is a black man and Stacy is a white woman. So back in those times, many people believe that Rodney did not get a fair shot because in 1996 we were still dealing with a lot of racism. And as I go on, and you guys will see, you know, this is why we're kind of down this road. And it made me think as I was reading, watching documentaries on him, like, this is why we're in the situation that we are, because if things weren't properly done, maybe, just maybe, we may have the wrong guy. Because I think sometimes we want to get the person who we think has done it, but 9 times out of 10, sometimes it's not that person because we're rushing to judgment. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there real quick because it was really bothering me as I was reading the information and looking at the case reports, and it was just like, he didn't have a shot to begin with. And that's the only reason why I was like, well, maybe that's why a lot of people think he's innocent, because of everything that has happened in the courts. So yeah, so Stacy was half dressed and her pants were down, and she just had a lot of like ligature marks around her and around her neck and just all over her body, periodly. But it was about a year before they actually got someone in custody, which ended up being Rodney Reed. Now, before we get into him, let's talk about Mr. Jimmy Fallon, her fiance. So when it came to him, he was listed as he was listed as a suspect. But the thing about this is, guys, he did a polygraph test, which he failed. He failed, but it was as if like police didn't care because he was already a police officer. So it was like one of those things, you know, y'all already know, we deal with it now in 2019. He failed the polygraph. It was like, it listed as deception on some of the questions, that if he had anything to do with Stacy's death. But the thing that bothered a lot of people is they never once checked their apartment in which they shared. And when he got the vehicle back, he sold it. He sold it. So it raised a lot of suspicion under him because, one, they always look at the partner or the spouse of the individual. But it was as if law enforcement just turned a blanket eye against him. And this is why, as you will see as I talk about Rodney a little bit more, why Rodney kind of got more time from his execution date, because of things that were left out and the way that prosecutors were doing him really dirty. So it wasn't until 1997 that they were able to get Rodney Reed. They ended up finding Rodney Reed because his DNA was on Miss Stacy. Now, many of you are probably like, well, his DNA was on Stacy, but Rodney has stated that him and Stacy were having an affair together, and they kept it very secretly. They kept it secret because of all the commotion between whites and blacks back in that time frame. And plus, she was engaged to a police officer who many have expressed that he was racist, or he didn't really like black people. That doesn't mean that you are racist. It just, you can have prejudice as well. But, you know, they just said that he would always tell Stacy if she ever cheated on him, he would kill her. Just those things that, you know, people say when they're very controlling. And he was very controlling. Even Stacy's best friend stated that he was very controlling. When Stacy got with him, they basically no longer were able to even have a friendship because he was so controlling in what Stacy did, where she went, who she talked to. And she even recounted an incident when they were on the phone and he came through the door and slammed the phone down while she was on the other end.
Multiple times he would walk in and hang up the phone before even saying anything. I know one time, I don't know if it was during Jamboree. It was kind of like a big fair that they had. She wanted to come down to it, and he was like, "There's no way in hell." The next day, tires are slashed in her truck.
That's coming from her best friend. But they were able to get this DNA because Rodney Reed had an incident, I guess, prior to in another sexual assault case. Now you're probably wondering, like, what the heck? But I think it was one of those cases where it got resolved or something like that, where he admitted it or whatnot, but he always stayed truthful from what the defense would say on this case. But the thing about it is, Rodney didn't really have a chance to begin with because they had already pinpointed him as the killer because of the DNA that was left on Stacy. And Rodney states that him and Stacy were together the prior night, prior to her going to work. And that's where a lot of the confusion comes in when it comes to the medical examiner, because I think that is why now he's trying to get pardoned, because there was a lot of reports on how long the DNA could stay on or inside Stacy, and I think those time frames has changed since 1996, and I don't think they accurately reported it. So the case goes to trial, and prosecutors basically state that Stacy was on her way to work. Prosecutors stated that Stacy was on her way to work and Rodney forced himself into the red truck. A lot of people were saying maybe it was when she was driving or when she was trying to get into her vehicle. And that's when they state that he raped her, killed her, and then tosses her body. But the thing about it is there was no other DNA to connect Rodney to this crime. There was no DNA in the vehicle. There was no fingerprints on the vehicle of Rodney at all whatsoever. The only DNA that was in this case for him was on Stacy, well, inside her, from what I've read. And that was all the DNA that they had of Rodney. It wasn't even in the pickup truck at all. And from my knowledge, there was a lot of crap in the darn truck, so there was nothing. And when I learned in forensics is when you enter a room, you always leave a piece of you. And people don't realize this. Like, you can drop your hair when you're touching stuff. You always leave a piece of evidence of you when you are entering a room, a vehicle, wherever you are. The defense attorney paints the picture that Stacy and her fiance got into it, and he ended up finding out about Rodney. And the reason why his DNA was on Stacy was because they were having an affair with one another. And they also painted a picture of how dangerous it was to be dating together and how scandalous it was as well in their town. Because you got to think about it, they're in a small town in Texas, and from what I know, Texas probably wasn't the best back in the day. And they also state how the only evidence that they have of Stacy being awake is because of her fiance. He was the last person to see Stacy before she went to work. So they are saying that he did it. And they are saying basically that he ended up finding out about Stacy and Rodney and got really mad because, one, he didn't like black people. Two, he was mad as hell she was having an affair. Though, like I said before, the defense attorneys, they had a uphill battle to go against anyways, because no matter what, when it was time to really bring in witnesses and stuff like that, they really couldn't bring them in, or it got really crazy to the point the judge didn't want to hear any new evidence as far as Rodney, because it was as if they had already painted in their mind that Rodney was guilty because of the DNA that was on Stacy. The thing about it is, the thing that I felt like the defense attorney really failed Rodney is because whether he's guilty or not guilty, if you are trying to go against a crime of murder and you have multiple witnesses saying that they have seen Stacy and Rodney together, even though it was a secret affair, why not put them on the stand? So a lot of people believe, including Rodney's mom, brothers, sisters, and them, state that they didn't really want to put them on the stand because they stated that it would make him look bad, and then another situation because there were drugs. But Rodney was like, that has nothing to do with this case. I did not kill her. You know, we were together. You know, she was at my house. She met my mom, you know, but they just really they only put 2 people on the stand, and that really kind of affected Rodney. Not to mention that they never got anyone to counter the medical examiner's statement. One of the medical examiners stated that Stacy died within an hour of leaving her home, and the defense attorney never got anyone to counter that. So that really hindered his case as well. And the defense attorney stated that there was one big piece of evidence that was left out, the DNA testing off the beer cans that were in the car, and they never received that that information. And the examiner stated that it excluded Reed, but they found 2 other individuals off of the beer can, which was Stacy's fiance and another police officer whose DNA were on those beer cans. They weren't aware of this information, and ultimately it really hindered his case because he really didn't have a lot to go off on. And like many have stated surrounding Rodney's case, he was what they wanted to begin with, so it wouldn't have mattered what they had against. 2001, Reed found out about this DNA and he was able to get a new hearing, but it was ultimately denied because they believed that the juries wouldn't have, it wasn't enough information to give them reasonable doubt. Then in 2002, Reed, he filed another subpoena, but he ended up not getting it because the court-appointed attorney didn't file it within the deadline. But they were saying that it just wasn't enough to create reasonable doubt. And like I said before, Jimmy failed the lie detector test when they asked him the question if he strangled his wife. He failed that question 2 times. And the reason that Jimmy wasn't really the prime suspect like that, because he had what they call like something of an alibi, because Jimmy and Stacy only had one vehicle and Stacy had the vehicle. So when they got the call that Stacy was missing, he went to his mother-in-law's house to get her vehicle to go to the store to figure out what was going on. But check this out. So the vehicle was found around 5:20 in the morning, but the truck was found prior to Stacy being reported missing. And police didn't really put the connections together until about later that night to figure out what was really happening. In this time frame, the fiance was the prime suspect, and they handed over the freaking vehicle to him. And as a result of that, the defense team were not able to confirm some of the things that they wanted to get taken care of. So after that, after he failed the second time, he lawyered up and he was never interviewed again. And the defense team was wondering if the law enforcement even interviewed any of Stacy's family or his family to figure out where he was between April 22nd and April 23rd. And no one can really recount where he was. But Reed's first attorney, when he first was able to afford one, because then money was running out, that's when he was appointed court attorneys, he states that they didn't really try hard to go against Jimmy, like the law enforcement. They didn't really put him under that scrutiny to figure out if he in fact actually killed his wife, especially because his fiance, especially because he failed the lie detector test when they asked him if he had strangled her. But in his defense, he says he was distraught. Like I said previously, they never searched his home, never figure out if anything was misplaced or anything had happened there before, you know, Stacy died. And then in 1995, that's when they found, like I said before, like for them to be able to have Reed's DNA, there was a rape case that occurred a year prior in 1995. And he stated that the sex was consensual, and the girl who accused him of sexual assault never went against a grand jury. So that case just basically went away, but law enforcement still had his DNA. So before, Reed's mother told him, you know, that he shouldn't be dating her because of all the things that were surrounding what she was dealing with and then what they were living through back in 1996. But Reed didn't listen, of course, and he was still dating her, and he has always stuck to his story that they were dating. You know, him and her had sex between April 21st, late hours, 22nd, and that's how his DNA was still on her. And as I was reading an article, there was an article that stated that how long the DNA can live inside the body, and it was stating that back then they put a different amount of the time. I have to pull this article up. And so I found it, y'all, because I wanted to make sure I was saying this right. So the medical examiner recants much of the testimony about the DNA, right? So the DNA that he was saying is that it states that his finding very few sperm indicated that Reed and Sykes had sex not less than 24 hours before Ms. Sykes' death. The new emissions of air by the state's own experts comes on the tails of a lengthy hearing conducted last fall that focused on inconsistent statements made by Sykes' fiance, Jimmy Fennell. So it says that where the state argues Sykes was killed between 3 and 5 a.m. on April 23rd, 1996, the evidence showed that Sykes was actually killed before midnight on April 22nd. During the time Fennell testified, he was with Sykes in their apartment. But Rodney Reed is basically on his last hearing. He was waiting to hear if he will be able to be pardoned or if something can happen to stop his execution, which is set for November 20th of 2019. That's literally 3 days before my birthday. That's so sad. But another thing too is Jimmy has been released from jail, I believe, last year, because he was sentenced to jail for 10 years for kidnapping and raping someone while he was being a police officer. Now, I'm no person who was living back in 1996, right? But I believe that Reed didn't have a chance to begin with, and even though there's DNA, there wasn't really a lot to go off of because of everything surrounding what they didn't do. I would have preferred them to really dig into her fiance so that there wouldn't be a reasonable doubt for Rodney Reed. And I'm not saying that maybe Rodney Reed did not kill her. Not saying that, because I don't put nothing past anyone, because Rodney Reed could have been mad that her ass was still married. You know what I'm saying? But it just bothers me because they did not press the issue against Jimmy, and I think we wouldn't be where we are right now if they would have, you know what I'm saying? And it's really sad that two of the police officers that were really for the case, trying to help the case, ended up dying. One by suicide, I think, and then something else happened. But either way, the case is crazy. Like I said, that's why I was like, whoa, this case hurt my dang on head, because there's so much information. And guys, I want you guys to watch the documentary too, because it's really good, and maybe it'll give you more of an insight on everything as well. And I'll drop the link to all the files on the case so you guys can look at it too. But like I said before, he has exhausted all his appeals, so I think this is the last shot that he has. I don't know what's going to happen. I guess we can stay updated on it. So what do you think happened to Stacy Sties? Do you think Rodney Reed is innocent, or do you think he is guilty of the crime? And do you also think that maybe the fiance had something to do with it? I don't know, y'all. I don't know. It's like I said, I really wish they would have went after the fiance a little bit more and not really solely went after Rodney, because then because it's like, I can understand the theory that they were having an affair together, especially because of what people were saying, how controlling he was, and you know, and maybe she met him, he was charming, he, you know, he just really made her feel alive. I can see it, I can understand that. And I think maybe he found out about it and he probably beat her ass, and yeah. So let me know what you guys think. Crazy case, y'all.